What happens when one of Hollywood's most unpredictable comedians sits down with daytime television sweetheart and everything goes completely off the rails? Well, you're about to find out, and trust me, this is one interview that nobody saw coming. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment because this story is absolutely wild. The Kelly Clarkson Show had always been known for its warm, feel-good atmosphere. Kelly had built her reputation on being the host who could make anyone feel comfortable, the one who brought out the best in her guests with genuine curiosity and infectious laughter. But on this particular afternoon, that carefully crafted environment was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way possible. Jim Carey walked onto the set with his trademark grin, waving to the audience as they erupted in applause. The crowd was clearly excited to see the legendary comedian, the man who had given them countless laughs through movies like The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, and The Truman Show. Kelly stood up from her chair, beaming as she always did, extending her arms for what should have been a standard celebrity greeting. "Jim Carey, everyone," Kelly announced to the crowd, her voice carrying that signature warmth that had made her show so successful. "Thank you so much for being here today." But as Jim approached, something felt different. His smile, while present, seemed forced. There was an intensity in his eyes that the audience couldn't quite place. He shook Kelly's hand, but the gesture was brief, almost dismissive. "Thanks for having me, Kelly," Jim said, his voice carrying an edge that wasn't there in his usual interviews. "Though I have to say, I'm curious about something." Kelly, ever the professional, maintained her composure as they both took their seats. The audience was still buzzing with excitement, completely unaware that they were about to witness something unprecedented in daytime television history. "Oh, what's that?" Kelly asked, settling into her chair with her usual ease, clearly expecting some lighthearted banter to kick off the interview. Jim leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from that practiced Hollywood smile to something more serious, more intense. "I'm curious about why you think it's okay to profit off other people's pain." The words hit the studio like a thunderbolt. Kelly's smile faltered for just a moment, confusion flickering across her face. The audience, still caught up in the excitement of seeing a beloved celebrity, hadn't quite processed what they'd just heard. "I'm sorry, what?" Kelly asked, her voice carrying a nervous laugh. "Jim, I'm not sure I understand what you mean." But Jim wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed to be just getting started. "Your show, Kelly, this whole format, you bring people on here, you dig into their personal lives, their struggles, their failures, and you package it up as entertainment. You make money off their vulnerability." The studio audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the Jim Carrey they expected to see. This wasn't the goofy, rubber-faced comedian who made them laugh until their sides hurt. This was someone else entirely. Someone with a message he was determined to deliver, whether anyone wanted to hear it or not. Kelly, to her credit, tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Jim, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. My show is about celebrating people, lifting them up, sharing their stories in a positive way." "Positive?" Jim's voice rose slightly, and for the first time, the audience began to sense that something was genuinely wrong. "You had that woman on last week, the one who lost her husband in that accident. She was crying, Kelly, actually crying on your stage, and your cameras kept rolling. Your audience was eating it up, and you were right there encouraging it." Kelly's face flushed. She knew exactly which interview Jim was referring to, and while she had genuinely felt for the woman's loss, she also couldn't deny that it had been one of their most watched segments that week. "That woman chose to come on the show," Kelly said, her voice becoming more defensive. "She wanted to share her husband's memory, to talk about the foundation she started in his name. I gave her a platform to do that." "A platform?" Jim laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You gave her a platform to be exploited, to have her grief turned into content for your show, ratings for your network, money in your pocket." The tension in the studio was now palpable. The audience members were looking at each other uncertainly, unsure whether this was some kind of performance art or if they were witnessing a genuine confrontation. Kelly's production team, watching from the wings, were frantically trying to figure out how to handle the situation. "Jim, I understand you're passionate about this," Kelly said, clearly trying to regain control of the interview. "But I think you're being unfair. I care about every single person who comes on this show." "Do you?" Jim shot back. "Or do you care about what they can give you? Their tears, their trauma, their pain, all wrapped up in a nice little bow for your audience to consume." Kelly's composure was beginning to crack. She had dealt with difficult guests before, but never anything like this. Never someone who seemed determined to tear apart everything she had built. "I think we should maybe take a different direction with..." The audience sat in stunned silence as Jim's words hung in the air. Kelly could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond to this unprecedented challenge to everything her show represented. "Jim, I understand. You have strong feelings about this," Kelly began, her voice steadier now. "But I genuinely believe that sharing stories, even difficult ones, helps people feel less alone. When that woman talked about her husband, the response from our viewers was incredible. People reached out, they donated to her foundation, they shared their own stories of loss. Jim shook his head, his expression growing more intense. And you think that justifies it? You think because something good might come from it, that makes it okay to turn someone's grief into your content? Kelly, do you hear yourself right now? I hear myself trying to defend something I'm proud of. Kelly replied, her own voice beginning to carry an edge. This show has helped people, Jim. Real people with real problems. Has it helped them? Or has it helped you? Jim leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Kelly's face. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've built an empire on other people's vulnerability, and you've convinced yourself it's noble. The audience was completely silent now, the usual energy of a daytime talk show replaced by an uncomfortable tension that seemed to fill every corner of the studio. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, uncertain whether they should continue rolling or cut to commercial. Kelly took a deep breath, clearly trying to center herself. You know what, Jim, I think you're projecting. You've spent your entire career making people laugh, often at your own expense. How is that different from what you're accusing me of? For the first time since the confrontation began, Jim paused. Kelly had hit something, and she could see it in his eyes. Because, Jim said slowly, when I make myself the fool, when I contort my face and throw my body around for laughs, I'm the one making that choice. I'm the one in control. These people who come on your show, they're not in control, Kelly. They're vulnerable, they're hurting, and you're taking advantage of that. Taking advantage, Kelly's voice rose slightly. These people want to be here, Jim. They request to come on the show. They have stories they want to tell. Do they want to tell their stories, or do they want what you can give them? Jim countered, the platform, the exposure, the validation. You dangle those things in front of people who are desperate to be heard, and then you act surprised when they're willing to bare their souls for it. Kelly felt her face flushed with anger. That's not fair, and you know it. I don't force anyone to share anything they don't want to share, don't you? Jim's voice was getting louder now, and the audience could sense that whatever thin veneer of civility had remained was beginning to crack. What about the pre-interviews, Kelly? What about the producers who coach these people on what stories will play well, what emotions will resonate with your audience? Kelly's eyes flashed. She knew he was getting dangerously close to exposing the behind-the-scenes machinery that made her show work. The careful preparation that went into creating those seemingly spontaneous emotional moments. Every talk show has producers. Jim, every show has preparation. That's how television works. Exactly, Jim said, pointing at her with sudden intensity. That's exactly my point. You've turned human emotion into television. You've made pain and joy and love and loss into products, to be packaged and sold. And what do you think comedy is? Kelly shot back, her composure finally cracking. What do you think your entire career has been? You've made millions of dollars making people laugh, often by acting like an idiot, often by degrading yourself. How is that any different? The question hung between them like a challenge. Jim stared at Kelly for a long moment, and she could see something shifting in his expression. Because, he said quietly, I chose to be the idiot. I chose to be degraded. I made that choice for myself. But you, Kelly, you convince other people to make that choice, and then you profit from it. That's not true, Kelly said, but her voice lacked conviction now. Isn't it? Jim pressed. What about the recovering addict you had on 2 months ago? The one who broke down talking about his rock bottom. Did he choose to share that story, or did your producers suggest it might be compelling television? Kelly's silence spoke volumes. The audience could feel the shift in the room, the way Jim's accusations were landing with uncomfortable accuracy. What about the single mother who couldn't afford Christmas presents for her kids? Jim continued, his voice gaining momentum. She cried on your stage, Kelly. She cried about her poverty, her struggle, her inability to provide for her children, and your audience loved it. They felt so good about themselves, watching her pain, knowing they were better off. We helped her, Kelly said weakly. We gave her money. We gave her gifts for her children. After you made her perform her desperation for your cameras, Jim replied, after you made her prove just how desperate she was, just how worthy of your help. Do you think she felt dignified in that moment? Kelly, do you think she felt human? Kelly looked out at her audience, seeing their faces for the studio felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Kelly sat rigid in her chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. The audience had gone from confused to uncomfortable to genuinely disturbed by what they were witnessing. Want to talk about voyeurism, Jim? Kelly's voice was sharp now, all pretense of professional composure abandoned. Let's talk about your last few years. Let's talk about your bizarre interviews, your erratic behavior, your public breakdowns. You've been performing your own mental health struggles for audiences. And now you want to lecture me about exploitation. Jim's face darkened. Kelly had crossed the line, and everyone in the studio could feel it. My breakdowns. Jim's voice was dangerously quiet. You think my struggles have been performance, haven't they? Kelly pressed, sensing she'd found his weak spot. The weird interviews where you talked about not existing. The strange speeches. The way you've been acting in public for years. If that's not exploiting your own pain for attention, then what is it? The audience held its collective breath. They could see Jim's hands clenching and unclenching, his jaw working as he processed Kelly's attack. The difference, Jim said, slowly, each word measured and deliberate, is that I wasn't selling hope to desperate people. I wasn't pretending to be their friend while I fed off their misery. Fed off their misery. Kelly's voice cracked slightly. Is that really what you think I do? I think you've convinced yourself you're helping people while you build your brand on their backs, Jim replied. I think you sleep well at night because you tell yourself that giving someone a few $1,000s makes up for turning their trauma into your content. Kelly stood up abruptly, surprising everyone, including Jim. You don't know anything about what I do or why I do it. You don't know about the letters I get from people who say the show saved their lives, who say that seeing someone else's story made them feel less alone. And you don't know anything about the people who leave here feeling used, feeling like they've been reduced to their worst moments for your audience's entertainment. Jim shot back, rising to meet her challenge. They were both standing now, facing each other across the small coffee table that separated their chairs. The audience was completely silent, stunned by the raw hostility that had erupted between two people they thought they knew. You know what your problem is, Jim? Kelly's voice was shaking with anger. You can't stand that someone else figured out how to connect with people without having to debase themselves. You've spent decades turning yourself into a cartoon character, and now you resent anyone who can be authentic without sacrificing their dignity. Authentic. Jim laughed bitterly. You think what you do here is authentic. This whole set is fake. Kelly, your smile is fake. Your concern is fake. Your entire persona is a carefully constructed lie, designed to make people trust you so you can harvest their stories. How dare you, Kelly said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying more venom than if she'd shouted. How dare you come onto my show, my set, and attack everything I've worked for? Because someone needs to, Jim replied. Someone needs to call out this whole sick system that turns human suffering into ratings gold. Kelly's producer was frantically signaling from offstage, but she ignored him completely. Her focus was entirely on Jim, on this man who had waltzed onto her show, and tried to destroy everything she'd built. You want to know what's sick? Kelly said, stepping closer to Jim. What's sick is a washed-up comedian who hasn't been relevant in years trying to tear down someone who's actually making a difference in people's lives. The words hit Jim like a physical blow. His face went completely still, and for a moment, the old Jim Carey, the performer, the mask-wearer, flickered across his features. Washed up, he said quietly. When's the last time you made a movie that mattered? Jim, when's the last time you did anything other than show up places and act weird for attention? At least, when I put people's pain on display, I'm honest about it. You've been performing your midlife crisis for years and calling it enlightenment. Jim stared at her for a long moment, and the audience could see something shifting in his expression. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, something that looked almost like hurt. You think this is a midlife crisis? He asked. I think this is a desperate attempt to stay relevant by a man who peaked 20 years ago, Kelly said, her voice cold and cutting. And I think, Jim said, his voice rising again, that you're exactly what's wrong with this entire industry. You've weaponized empathy, Kelly. You've turned compassion into currency. And you've convinced yourself you're a saint while you do it. Get out, Kelly said suddenly, her voice sharp and final. The studio went dead silent. Even the cameras seemed to freeze. What? Jim asked, clearly not expecting this response. I said get out, Kelly repeated, louder this time. Get off my stage. Get out of my studio. This interview is over. Jim stared at her, and for a moment, it looked like he might argue. But then, Jim paused at the edge of the stage, turning back to face Kelly one last time. The entire studio held its breath, sensing that whatever he was about to say would be the final word in this devastating confrontation. The saddest part about all of this, Jim said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent studio, is that you actually believe your own act. You've told yourself the lie so many times that you think it's true. But deep down, in that place, you don't let the cameras see. You know exactly what you are. Kelly's face was flushed with anger and humiliation. And what's that? Jim, what am I? You're a parasite, Jim said simply, the words cutting through the studio like a knife. You feed on other people's emotions, and you've convinced them to thank you for it. The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row, actually, recoiled as if they'd been slapped. Kelly stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, clearly not expecting such a brutal final assessment. You want to call me washed up? Fine, Jim continued, his voice gaining strength. Maybe I am. Maybe my best days are behind me. But at least I never built my career on convincing broken people that I was their friend while I turned their pain into profit. Security guards were starting to move toward the stage, but Jim held up a hand, signaling he wasn't done. And to everyone sitting in this audience, Jim said, turning to face the crowd directly, ask yourselves this. When you go home tonight and think about what you just witnessed, ask yourselves why you're really here. Are you here to support people, or are you here to watch them bleed? The camera caught several audience members looking genuinely uncomfortable, some even looking ashamed. The usual supportive energy of a daytime talk show audience had been completely shattered. "Jim, you need to leave now," Kelly said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Oh, I'm leaving," Jim replied, backing toward the exit. "But I want everyone here to remember this moment. Remember the moment someone told you the truth about what this really is. And remember how angry it made the person who profits from your ignorance." Kelly took a step toward him, her professionalism completely abandoned. "You don't know anything about me or what I do here." "I know enough," Jim shot back. "I know you've turned vulnerability into a commodity. I know you've made desperation into entertainment. And I know that when someone calls you out on it, your first instinct is to silence them." The security guards were closer now, but Jim was already at the edge of the stage area, clearly preparing to leave on his own terms. "You want to know the real tragedy here, Kelly?" Jim asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine sadness now. "It's that you probably started with good intentions. You probably really did want to help people. But somewhere along the way, you forgot the difference between helping someone and using them." Kelly's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "Get out," she said again, but her voice was quieter now, almost defeated. "You know what the worst part is?" Jim continued, seemingly unable to stop himself from delivering one final blow. "Your audience loves you for it. They love watching you extract tears from desperate people because it makes them feel better about their own lives. You've created a whole ecosystem of emotional vampirism, and everyone involved thinks they're doing good." "That's enough," Kelly said, but Jim was already walking away. "You're right, Kelly," he called over his shoulder as he headed for the exit. "It is enough, more than enough." As Jim disappeared through the stage exit, the studio remained in complete silence. Kelly stood alone in the center of her stage, surrounded by her audience, her cameras, her carefully constructed world, but looking more isolated than anyone had ever seen her. She looked out at the crowd, these people who had come to see a lighthearted interview with a beloved comedian, and saw confusion, discomfort, and something that might have been recognition in their faces. "We're going to take a break," Kelly said finally, her voice barely audible. But everyone could see that she wasn't just talking about a commercial break. Something fundamental had been broken in those few explosive minutes, something that might not be easily repaired. The cameras kept rolling as Kelly walked off her own stage, leaving her audience sitting in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The warm, safe space of daytime television had been shattered, and in its place was an uncomfortable truth that no one quite knew how to handle. Outside the studio, Jim Carey walked to his car without looking back, leaving behind not just a television show, but an entire industry forced to confront some very uncomfortable questions about the price of entertainment and the cost of turning human emotion into content. That's the story of how Jim Carey got kicked off Kelly Clarkson's show. But more than that, it's the story of what happens when someone refuses to play by the rules of an industry built on other people's vulnerability. Make sure to subscribe if you want more stories like this, and let me know in the comments. Do you think Jim Carey was right to call out what he saw as exploitation, or did he go too far in his attack on Kelly Clarkson?